Dan Perry, your thoughts?
The Chinese Communist Party has survived in recent decades on a strength of two deals. With the Chinese people, the deal is basically give up your freedom and we'll provide prosperity. With the West and the world, it was don't mess with us and we will provide stability. Now, the first deal is being frayed by declining, economic growth rates and, of course, the anger over zero COVID. The second by Xi's bellicosity over Taiwan and in the South China Sea and in general.
Will public anger destabilize Xi's grip? Dan Perry, take the lead, please.
Xi took a chance in replacing his predecessor's non-ideological relative pragmatism with Marxist nationalism. But he seems to be a true believer of the kind that sometimes get in their own way and trip themselves up. The unpopular zero COVID policy also attaches to him personally. So, yes, he is a lightning rod, but it doesn't seem to be in the Chinese Communist Party's DNA to abandon a leader that they just reappointed. So I suspect, as goes Xi, so will the party.
Yachu Wang, your thoughts?
Now Omicron is not that a serious disease, and the treatment after you get a COVID is proven to be effective, and the vaccine is proven to be effective. So for China to keep this kind of stringent lockdown is unscientific and unreasonable, and people are very angry about it. And also, it affects the economy, as I said. People are losing jobs because they can't go to work. They can't open their shops. So it has huge economic impact on people's lives.
But there is another side, I think.
Please,
go
Dan.
ahead.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, China with 1.4 billion people has only recorded 5,000 and some COVID deaths. That's less than half of Israel's. And some may not believe the numbers, but China's growth rate for this year is supposed to be over 8%, which is higher than in recent years. So, of course, individuals suffer, and obviously it's a tremendous inconvenience and nightmare for cities to be in lockdown, for 2 months like Shanghai was. But the fact is that the zero COVID policy has yielded, not zero deaths, but closer than most countries and almost all countries. And indeed, in the past several weeks, there's been a huge surge of COVID cases. So I'm not, the policy has not been a complete and total failure. It's difficult for me to even believe I'm defending the Chinese government, but this policy is not indefensible. If you consider, how hysterical the entire rest of the world was about COVID, not a year ago.
The zero COVID policy is running out of steam, given the death tolls, for example, statistics in Hong Kong and Singapore, the places where it already opened up. And I think it's about time to seriously and scientifically re-evaluate this policy and make a very difficult decision. And I think, what's happening in several cities in the last day or two, in the last 2 days, testimony that people are probably, there are people out there who are really fed up with this. And I think it's about time to really think about it and make a hard decision here.
But
By
is
the
it
way,
really?
I have to ask,
Yes,
do you think is it inconceivable that the protests over zero COVID really mask a deeper discontent?
Dan, you're reading my notes. You're reading my notes.
Great minds think alike.
I have an opinion on this. You see demonstrations in Ann Arbor, Michigan. You see demonstrations in Austin, Texas. People carrying guns to the state capitol. They're chanting more or less the same slogans, freedom, this kind of thing. And we don't elevate to that kind of a level. I think,
but rare is the country where that type of chant and that type of protest carries as big a risk as it does in China. It's a different context altogether.
It's completely different political context.
I think that that this indifference to the protests could in the end prove unwise, with all due respect. I mean, throughout history, despotic regimes have always appeared permanent. And often it lasted long, but they tend to collapse. Yeah. They tend to collapse with a surprising suddenness and speed. Yeah. I'm not saying that this is what's about to happen in China, but some version of it eventually will, unless we truly believe, as some experts do, that there's something antithetical to democracy in Chinese culture. And I think to believe that is to ignore the fact that the Taiwanese certainly do love their democracy, and the Hong Kong people who are Chinese certainly do lament, the dictatorship that has descended upon them.
Professor Jiang, you wanted to chime in.
Well, as a Chinese, I certainly hope for stability and in China. It's in our history we have seen time and time again that any sort of a violent eruption and sort of a revolutionary activities usually doesn't lead to a good result.
The dynasties only ended as a result of a rebellion and uprising in 1911, 1912, and of course, the current Communist Party came about as a result of the civil war that ended in 1949. I mean, most regimes that are not based on an ideology of freedom end up collapsing at one point or another.
Let's take a look at Iran, at Russia. We don't need to go so far in history.
The Soviet Union collapsed. The American Revolution won. So I think I have hope for our young people.
The thing is, though, the Chinese Communist Party is the most profound dictatorship yet to exist that has nuclear weapons. And that makes it far less likely that any outside powers will try to destabilize China. That's one of the major challenges for the opponents of the regime.
You talk to people on the streets in China. I think overall people are still very happy with the current administration. And the approval rate, I think, at least is way higher than Joe Biden, for example, in the United States.
I said from the beginning that there was a deal, your freedom in exchange for growth and prosperity, and I don't deny that the Chinese Communist Party did fulfill its part of that deal, but eventually that equation becomes less sustainable as, ironically, as the country gets more prosperous. Once it becomes a prosperous enough country and it doesn't need spectacular economic growth anymore, I find it difficult to believe that the people will not want a different kind of deal, because otherwise you're condemning about 1/7 of the world's population forever to living under dictatorship. And I think that idea is distressed.